Good afternoon, everyone from Melbourne, Australia. And the good news is that radio astronomy in Australia is alive and well and has been for many, many decades. The proud history of research and development. So a lot of work was after World War II, which so many of you will be familiar with. And that's stretching all the way now to our square kilometre array under development and Australia's current collaboration with international projects. Alongside that, then, as far as SARA is concerned, amateurs are very much involved in radio astronomy, and we'll meet a few of them along the way. And there's a range of systems being developed around in different areas around the country. And what's happening most recently is that there is now increasing collaboration with the professional world of radio astronomy, because there are connections being made between, for example, the Astronomical Society of Victoria Radio Astronomy section and our CSIRO. So we're going to just have a quick look through back to the very early days of radio astronomy, and starting with Grote Reber, who many of you would know of. And the reason I'm talking about Grote is that, of course, he ended up in Tasmania, Australia, for the later section of his work and his life. He heard about Karl Jansky's work, very early work, and by 1937 he had his own radio telescope built in his back garden, and worked alone as essentially the only radio astronomer in the world. It was regarded as just a nothing at that time. Over the war, of course, things happened in radar, and following the explosion of radar and developments in that area, then a lot of work was done post-war, post-World War II. And so Grote Reber moved via Hawaii in 1951 to Tasmania, Australia in 1954, mainly because he wanted to get away from man-made interference, which was already an issue in those days. And if you ever visit Australia, make sure you get to Tasmania. That's the island down the bottom. I'll show you a map of Australia shortly. Because if you go to the Mount Pleasant Radio Telescope Observatory there is a Grote Reber Museum. I haven't been there yet. It's on my list of things to do, but one day I will get there. So that sets the scene. And really, this is at the point at which we bring in CSIR and later CSIRO. CSIR was the group, the government-funded group, that established a division of radio physics during World War II, predominantly in Sydney, but not totally. And then that developed into a radio astronomy research organisation or research section within CSI immediately after the war. And an installation at Coleroy was used to continue investigations into radio emissions from the sun, because they were very aware that there were these signals coming into their radar systems, which they eventually linked to the sun and sunrise. And then this work was subsequently extended to other areas. CSIR is now known as CSIRO, Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research, I've missed a word out there, Research Organisation, and is responsible for managing, among other things, the Parkes Telescope and other installations around Australia. So another person significant along the way was Ruby Payne Scott, and she was incredibly significant at the time, partly because, of course, she was female, and that was very unusual to have women involved with this work. But in fact, over the years during the war, many of them were involved with the top secret work on radar, and she was working for CSIR. And that work led to her research into the connection between sunspots and the level of radio emissions from the sun. In 1946, a big contribution was that she was the first to perform radio interferometry measurements. She actually took the measurements with using a sea cliff observation site in Sydney. So the idea was built on the top of a cliff. The surface of the sea would act as a reflector, and so you'd have a virtual antenna below the cliff as well as the real antenna above the cliff, and that gave the interferometry separation. She worked with Joe Pawsey, who became a big mover and shaker in radio astronomy, and Lindsay McCready. And as I say, she was the first to perform these radio interferometry measurements. There is one of the radar stations, 200 megs operating. It was a radar system and then developed into this interferometry. It's right on the edge of a cliff in Sydney. Payne Scott recorded the data, and then the CSIR team later analysed that data to make sense of what they were looking at. This is the one at Dover Heights, used between 1946 and 1954. There's nothing for scale there, but it is quite significant size. And there's a trace there, one of their traces, their interferometry traces. Those of you doing interferometry would recognise the peaks there. That, as you can see there, 22nd of October 1948, that particular trace was made. And in recognition of the importance of this Dover Heights installation on the coast in Sydney, a replica was opened. Now the replica has been scaled down. The base is still there. The base of the Yagi is still there, but the model is much, much smaller than the original. And there is a plaque, as you can see there, describing the work that was done and recognizing the importance of the Dover Heights installation at that time. That replica was opened in 2003. And we've come a long way since then, because we now have our Parkes radio telescope, which many of you would recognize. It's located in the township of Parkes, or just outside the town, in central west New South Wales, and administered through the ATNF, the Australia Telescope National Facility. It was commissioned in 1962 and has been upgraded regularly and contributes to the worldwide program of radio astronomy and space communications. You can see the extension that was put on. That gridded area extended the diameter of the dish at some point. And it's very, very significant design. The building itself supports the dish and has the motor drives in there. And then all the electronics is in that circular building underneath the dish itself. You may recognize that from the film The Dish, because it was used, and this and others, particularly Honeysuckle Creek near Canberra, to communicate with the Apollo mission, and particularly them landing on the moon, first landing on the moon with Neil Armstrong and Michael Owen. We also have the Australia Square Kilometre Array in development, the Murchison Radio Astronomy Observatory, the Canberra Deep Space Communications Complex, which is the one on the right, and other significant installations around the country. So the government does recognise, this is ATNF, this is government funded predominantly. The government does recognise the importance of radio astronomy, and there are significant developments going on, in particular the Square Kilometre Array. If you want to follow that story of the development of the Parkes telescope and what was happening during the war and post-war, this is an excellent book. Unfortunately, when I looked, it seems to be out of print, but you might be able to find a remaindered copy somewhere, or go to a charity shop. You might find them lurking in the book collection there. Peter Robertson from the University of Melbourne wrote this about radio astronomy and the lead up to getting the funding for the Parkes telescope, and then actually it being built and commissioned and used and extended. Excellent book. if you can get a hold of a copy. So that's a little bit of background about how significant radio astronomy has been in Australia. In fact, Australia was leading the world for many, many years. Now I think there's much more international collaboration, and Australia, the professionals are involved with that international collaboration. But I know that my American geography is not great. I have to go and look on a map if someone mentions a particular state. So I thought I would just show you this map to show you basically what's what and what's where within Australia. And you can see bottom right, Victoria and Melbourne there, which is where I am at the moment. It's in fact, in terms of area, Victoria and Tasmania, you can see are the two small ones. Immediately above us, the green one is New South Wales, and you'll see Canberra, the capital of Australia, and Sydney over on the coast, which is some of the pictures we were just looking at were from Sydney. Canberra was supposed to be built halfway between Sydney and Melbourne. Melbourne originally was the capital, but the site that they chose is closer to Sydney. It's about probably 3 hours drive now from Sydney to Canberra. And to get from Melbourne to Canberra, it's more like 7 hours of driving. So that gives you an idea of scale. Over to the west of Victoria in the light blue is South Australia. And then below the island, you can see with Hobart as its capital is the state of Tasmania. These are all separate states. They have their own state government. And then we have a federal government based in Canberra. In terms of Drake's Lounge Australia, we have contributors in Melbourne and around Victoria. We have an increasing number now in New South Wales. That seems to have not been a big area for amateur radio astronomy. We certainly have a very active group in South Australia, and we haven't yet extended into the others. So up north there's Queensland, and you can see Brisbane. Right down Brisbane is the capital of the state of Queensland, and that's where the cyclone just went through. I don't know whether it appeared on your news, but it's caused quite a lot of consternation, strong winds and damage and flooding. It's just gone through. I think they escaped the vast majority of the strength of the storm, but it's a bit of a mess up in Brisbane at the moment, or in that area. And you can see all the way up to Cairns on the coast there. Queensland is a very big state. That's about 2,000 kilometres between Cairns and Brisbane. Going to the west, you see the Northern Territory. There are two territories. Canberra is in the Australian Capital Territory, and Northern Territory has Darwin. And then right over in the yellow area is Western Australia, where our square kilometre arrays and various other installations over on the coast, over near what you can see there, Carnarvon. Perth is the capital of Western Australia, the state. So that gives you a little geography lesson, so you know when we're referring to various locations within Australia, that gives you an idea of what's what. So starting with me, I'm a physics teacher, and I look after the Australian end of Drake's Lounge Australia, which meets once a month. Predominantly secondary school, although I have taught year 5 and 6, which is the top end of our primary school. And my focus is to develop astronomy-related activities for students, and in particular, those that can be conducted during the school day. It's very hard to get an astronomy evening together. So I've got a YouTube video, Astronomy During the School Day, which you can dig out and have a look at. We started with sundials and the study of the sun. And in fact, we've just built last year, finished off an anelomatic sundial at one of my schools. That's where the person stands on a plate and where you stand, it's all marked out, depends on the time of year. And your shadow, you become the gnomon, you cast a shadow onto the scale, and that will tell you the time. We've been doing direct observations of the sun using a filter, or through NASA SOHO. Most recently, I've been developing materials on space weather. And then we also, through SARA, we have access to radio Jobe, scope in a box, all the standard things, SuperSID. And then also the online optical and radio telescopes, of which there is a growing number. So that's a little bit about me and my background. That recent conference paper was to the physics group in Melbourne, and I gave that same paper to an international conference looking at specifically radio astronomy. This was for teachers. And then the most recent one, which was towards the end of last year, was on space weather and things that can happen when we're in the middle of a sunspot maximum. I think NASA has declared we've turned the corner now, and we've been through the sunspot maximum. It will start to quieten down. What's important for SARA and the work in this area is that teachers are increasingly looking for ready-to-use materials. You'd be very aware that teachers are very busy. A lot is put onto them, which has got nothing to do with teaching. And so what they're looking for is ready-to-use materials. This is where scope in a box and SuperSID come in very nicely. And so my focus has been to see if we can either identify materials that we can give to teachers or develop them and hand them over ready to use. And the study of space weather is a really good one because there's so many materials online, live space weather, like our Bureau of Meteorology, for example, has a space weather section. This is my own installation, which you would recognize in one of my graphs. So my lawn does not look like that at the moment, I can tell you. We haven't had rain for several months now. My lawn is a very deep shade of straw, but that's at the time when it was very green. I'm a member of the Astronomical Society of Victoria, and they have an active radio astronomy section. And I'll make the PowerPoint available. You can follow the link there. And it's at the dark sky site for members of the Astronomical Society of Victoria. Is at the Leon Moe Radio Observatory. This is about, from here, if I was to drive, it would be something like 2.5 hours north of Melbourne. So it's getting into a relatively radio quiet area, and it's not a bottle one optical, it's more like a 2 because of townships nearby. But we do have a dish, which you'll see in a moment, at the Radio Observatory, Leon Moe Radio Observatory. And Leon Moe was a member of the Astronomical Society that donated the land. So the society owns the land now, donated by Leon Moe. And Phil Costigan is the leader of that radio astronomy section. And they astound me every time they do work because of the knowledge that's within that group. There's a whole range of different people, electronics knowledge, mechanical, and theoretical, and so on. We have an 8-meter dish at the Leon Moe Radio Observatory, and we've had major problems with our dish. On the right-hand side there is the lead screw that allows the dish to tilt. So there's a motor driving and rotating, and that screw has had to be replaced because it was wearing out. It turns out that it was greased, but the dust was getting into the grease, and you can imagine a combination of grease and dust is a pretty good abrasive. And so on the left-hand side, you see it being dismantled. That lead screw was taken out, replaced. And here you can see the plinth. So we've got the issue of the weight of the materials that we're dealing with and the height. So they've had to be very careful. This has been going on for probably 18 months now. And what's significant in that right-hand photograph is the orange blob that you can see in the middle, which is a set of bellows that they've been developing to go over the lead screw to try and keep out the dust. It's a very dusty area. You can see in the background there that it's just open bushland and a lot of dust flying around. It gets very hot in summer. It gets very cold at night. So there's a big temperature range. And it's very dusty. And this is the most recent picture, which many of you won't have seen. It's a brand new that came from Phil. And there you can see the yellow or orange bellows extended across the lead screw. So it's back in place. It's now covered over, and it is now tilting the dish, as you can see, quite successfully. Over on the right, top right, you can see the box with all the radio gear in, and that's had a major redevelopment. While we've had the dish out of action, they've been able to look at the electronics inside that box and improve it. We're now looking at SDR on the receiver side, for example, and a reference signal generator so that they can switch between the live signal from the dish and the reference signal. But the important thing is there is the yellow-orange bellows, which should extend the life of that particular installation. Steve Bentley is another member of that group, and he's the electronics guru. So he takes bits of electronics back to his workshop at home. And this is one of his designs. This is what's going on inside that box that you saw in the picture. You see the feed horn on the left, and then you've got the reference noise source and an RF switch into the LNA, and then Peltier cell cooling to keep it reasonably stable in terms of temperature. It's very hard, given the temperature range, to keep it within certain bounds, but that new design is working very well. And as it says here, they'll soon be back in business. So Phil reckons they'll be, within the next month or two, we'll be back to collecting data. I know some of you in the Northern Hemisphere are looking forward to receiving some Southern Hemisphere data to fill in gaps in your diagrams. And also, I mentioned earlier the collaboration with professional groups. CSIRO is very interested in what we're doing at the Astronomical Society. A group went up about a year or more so ago to see the dish and to establish that collaboration, which will be back underway very shortly once the dish is working. More details there. This was part of Steve's measuring the actual profile, the reception profile of the waveguide, and he set it up in his own back garden and got some antenna pattern measurements from it. Dan Shaka is a recent addition to our group in Melbourne. He's got a 2.4 meter dish, which is shown here. Unfortunately, that dish is not operating at the moment because Len is about to move house. He's actually moving into New South Wales, so we're hoping that that will extend Drake's Lounge Australia into New South Wales more actively. So he's taking his dish with him. It's a 2.4 meter dish with a Nolec SDR and Shorebird LNA, fairly standard installation. As I said, as the Astronomical Society of New South Wales, there is a link there once you get the PowerPoint. It's not particularly active in radio astronomy at the moment, but there is a group of them that are now starting to join us, and we're hoping that they will contribute more as we go along. Astronomical Society of South Australia has a very active radio astronomy group, and you can click on that link and get to their website and see what they're up to. And in particular, Duncan Campbell-Wilson is one of their active members, and they've most recently been working on the Velar pulsar, with their 2.3 meter dish, and they make observations every day at 8:20. And in particular, they've been looking for the glitch, the signal from that Velar pulsar. They were written up in the Astronomer's Telegram to confirm the report by others about the glitch. And if you want to get the technical details of that, then it's Astronomer's Telegram 16608. They're free to get to view as far as I'm aware. Down in the island of Tasmania, the Astronomical Society of Tasmania is reasonably active in radio astronomy, and in particular, as far as our Drake's Lounge Australia is concerned, Andrew Klekchuk is the important person in that area. He's developed a very significant observatory within his home property. He's close to Hobart, but sufficiently far away from Hobart that he doesn't get a lot of RFI, and he's been particularly looking at the sun in recent times, given its high level of activity. This is part of his installation, and if you tune into Drake's Lounge Australia, Andrew is usually there with us, and he's always got something to tell us. This is many of his antennas in the garden. Again, you can see very dry conditions, and therefore a lot of dust, which he has to deal with. And he has been looking at Jupiter and various Jupiter emissions, and also looking at simultaneous observations between Australia and K4LED in Georgia. And that's produced quite interesting results, which, as I say, you can always join us on Drake's Lounge Australia and pick Andrew's brain about what all that means and the significance.
Paul, we're going to have to cut you short here because we've got another presentation coming in pretty quick.
Yep.
So,
all right, I'm nearly finished though. So this is all on the PowerPoint, but what's important, mentioning Grote Reber, Andrew worked with Grote Reber on his arrival in Tasmania, and there are some, I'll show references there. If you follow the links in the PowerPoint, you can look at some of those papers where Andrew worked with Grote Reber. Drake's Lounge Australia meets once a month. It's the fourth Friday evening for you, Saturday morning for us. February and March this year have been slightly different because it's been the fourth Friday, which has been the end of the month, and the fifth Saturday for us because of where the Fridays and Saturdays fall. But please join us. The meetings are recorded, and the recording goes on to YouTube. And there we are. I shall stop that.
thank you, Paul.
Any questions?
So if anybody has any questions for Paul, we got a really brief time for questions, and then we've got Whittam Reeve coming on next, or Whit, yeah. So, as always, we can field questions out of out of Zoom.
And then we want to get we can also, Paul, get a copy of your presentation. If we don't already have it.
Yeah, if you could email that to me at jasonburnfield@gmail.com, then I can put it with the rest, and we're going to distribute it to the attendees.
You may want to put it in the chat if you can.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I'm going to put my email in the chat.
Yeah.
So everyone who's presenting, if you could email me a copy of your presentation, before, or basically after you're through. Then I'll make sure that a copy gets distributed to all of the participants to keep or to have. So.
Jason, I have a question for Ken, actually. Is this meant to take the place of a proceedings?
Yes, yes, it is, Dave. That's the intent. That would include the itinerary electronically as well. Oh, that was good.
Thank you, everybody.